Brian, thank you for sharing your gifts with us today in worship. We're glad you're here. The gospel lesson for today comes from Luke's gospel, the 7th chapter. It actually is the first of, I think, 6 stories that are inserted in Luke and Matthew and shared somewhat from the Markan tradition. We will be reading 4 of those over the next few weeks as gospel lessons. But today is the story of Jesus' entry into Capernaum, following what Luke calls the Sermon on the Plain. So we read from Luke 7, verses 1 through 10. After Jesus had finished all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. A centurion there had a slave whom he valued highly and who was ill and close to death. When he heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders to him, asking him to come and heal his slave. When they came to Jesus, they appealed to him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy of having you do this for him," meaning the centurion, "for he loves our people, and it is he who built our synagogue for us." And Jesus went with them. But when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore I did not presume to come to you. But only speak the word, and let my servant be healed. For I also am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my slave, 'Do this,' and the slave does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd that followed him, he said, "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith." When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. We left Anchorage on a cool, clear morning in mid-August in 1973, and we drove north toward Fairbanks. We were driving a 1967 Volkswagen Bug, and we were supposed to be headed south toward Canada through the Yukon and Montana and Alberta and eventually home. But my brother-in-law David and I weren't sure if we would ever get back that way again. And we wanted to see Denali. We wanted to see Mount McKinley, 20,320 feet above sea level, the highest point on this continent. We didn't really have time to stop that long. We just wanted to see it. We wanted to stop along the side of the road and try to comprehend the beauty and majesty of that mountain, to look at its clouds and its colors, to take in its features of snow and rock even in August. And I remember driving up that road when I first caught a glimpse of that mountain in the distance, and I was amazed. Fortunately, the day was clear, and we found a place to pull over. It doesn't take much of a place for a 1967 Volkswagen Beetle. A place to take some pictures. Just stand in awe of what a monument of God's creation was before us. And I remember that while we were there, we didn't talk very much. We just looked at the mountain in amazement and tried to comprehend what we saw. I guess that's what happens whenever we're really amazed. Webster's dictionary defines amazement, or being amazed, as being filled with surprise and wonder, feeling astonished. And today's gospel lesson from Luke tells us of a time when Jesus felt amazed, not so much at a scene from nature, but at the depth of the trust and the faith that met him in the life of this centurion who was stationed in Capernaum. Luke places this story, as does Matthew really, after the Sermon on the Plain, when Jesus has been teaching the people, or as Luke so eloquently says it, after Jesus had finished all his sayings in the hearing of the people. I suspect that Jesus was tired. He was probably looking forward to some rest, but also to his teaching that he wanted to continue in the synagogue at Capernaum as he went into that village or town. He often taught in that synagogue every day. As was happening more and more often at this point in Jesus' public ministry anyway, Jesus' reputation is preceding him, and the crowds are continuing to follow him everywhere. And word of his arrival in Capernaum has gotten to this centurion, who is deeply concerned about a valued slave in his household who is gravely ill and evidently close to death. The centurion believes that Jesus has the ability and the power to heal his slave. And so he sends some of the Jewish elders from town to Jesus, who, according to Luke, appealed earnestly to Jesus, asking him to come to the centurion's house and to perform this act of compassion. The elders' approach to Jesus is rather eye-opening because they are interceding for a Gentile. Now, it could be that the centurion worshiped the God of Israel, but probably hadn't submitted to the rites of the Jewish faith, especially the rite of circumcision. We don't know. Luke doesn't say. But Luke does say that the elders told Jesus that the centurion was worthy of Jesus' response because the centurion loves our people and has built for us a synagogue. I don't know about you, but I find it interesting that they don't say that the sick man is worthy of Jesus' response. But I think we know the kind of compassionate healer that Jesus was, so I'm sure he agreed to accompany the elders back to the centurion's house for that reason as well. But before he can even get to the house, the centurion sends some of his friends to give Jesus another message. Please don't trouble yourself to come into my house, or as Luke says, under my roof. I'm not worthy of your presence, Jesus. Lord, don't trouble yourself. If you will, just speak a healing word on behalf of my slave from where you are. And I say that, Lord, because I'm a man who is under authority too. I say it because I have people under me, and they do what I say, just like my slave who did what he was told. Jesus, I believe all you have to do is speak the word, and I ask you to do that. And what is Jesus' response? Luke says Jesus is amazed. Jesus is filled with surprise and wonder. Jesus is astonished, if you will, by the faith of this centurion. And he turns to the people walking along with him, and he says, not even in a land and in a people like Israel, grounded in God's love and in God's ways, have I found such faith. Like always, Jesus' initial response is to teach. And when the people who had been sent by the centurion returned to his house, they found the slave in good health. Jesus was amazed Jesus was filled with surprise and wonder at the faith of the centurion. The faith that believed that a word from Jesus had power, had performative power, if you will, like the authority of a command given and received. And I suspect, too, that part of Jesus' amazement was that the request for healing came from a man who was regarded unworthy by himself, but worthy by others, whether they were religious elders or friends. They tell the story of a young minister fresh out of seminary who took his first call to a church and was so confident and ready on that day that he thought he could handle anything. On the first Sunday of his new parish work, he came into the sanctuary literally flowing, with his head held high and his robe streaming behind him. And he had his Bible in his hand and his sermon ready. He began that sermon confidently, but the more he preached that day, the more concerned he got. He realized that maybe the people were not so impressed with his sermon or his degree. He ended the sermon rather awkwardly, and when the service was over, he walked down the aisle toward the back of the church with his head down and his spirit not so full of himself. Not many people said anything to him, but the last person out the door that Sunday was an older man who realized how dejected the young pastor felt, and he said to him, "Pastor, you'll be okay. We're glad you're here. And you know, if you had walked in here like you walked out of here, you would have walked out like you walked in." Lord, I'm not worthy, but I know you can speak the word. I know who you are. I know who you've come from. And I believe in your word of healing. Brothers and sisters, this story portrays a Lord who is amazed at the faith of his people. It portrays a Lord who responds to acts of faithfulness with healing and with restoration. It portrays a Lord who teaches us that we serve a God who is faithful to us. A God who can be trusted because faith was God's idea long before it was ours. Maybe at times we're guilty of being too self-deprecating as people of faith. I don't know. Maybe we should realize that we serve a Christ whose word speaks to any unworthiness of ours with an invitation to grace and to wholeness. Maybe we should claim with joy and with fulfillment that when we are faithful to God in this life, Jesus is amazed at us. That Jesus looks at us with wonder and astonishment, and Jesus is happy. Jesus is present, and he comes to us in love with a constant desire to respond to our heartfelt needs and requests. Young Brittany is 8 years old, and she lives in Moore, Oklahoma. She and her family lost their home in the recent tornado. And she asked if she could say the prayer at her church last Sunday, and they said, of course. She prayed that God would help everyone who lost their home to get another one by the end of the summer. And she thanked God especially that her grandmother's special little dog, Elsie, was found alive in the basement. And you know, Jesus was amazed. Ben has leukemia, and at the age of 13 has spent most of the last 3 years in and out of hospitals. He's kept a journal of his prayers about his experiences, and you know, most of those prayers Almost all of the prayers in his journal are for his family members who have faithfully supported him and for the other patients that he meets. None of the prayers are for himself. And Jesus is amazed. I think of a small group of faithful people who walked to the wilderness of what is now Piedmont, Carolina in 1753. They prayed that they could start a mission for Christ on the land that came to be called Wachovia. And eventually, some of their group made 300,000 bricks by hand and constructed the building that we sit in and dedicated it to the glory of God. They prayed for the strength and love that it takes to be a community here dedicated to the Savior and to his gospel. And Jesus is amazed. My friends, I invite all of us this week to live with that kind of faith. No matter what we're facing, what we're struggling with, or what we're celebrating. I invite us to have a faith that amazes Jesus, and let's see what happens. Let's have a faith that will prompt Jesus to say, not even in all the Moravian church have I found such faith. Let's have a faith that when people come here to live and serve in this community of faith, they will say that each time they return to worship or learn or offer their faith to God, they find this congregation alive and well and in good health. Let's have a faith that proclaims again and again that Jesus Christ is worthy of our faith. He loves his people, and it was Christ himself who really built this church for us anyway. Thanks be to God for the amazement of Jesus. Amen.